Over to you, Hayley.
Perfect. Just pull my, yeah. Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Hayley Rogers, and I'm the marketing manager at IHEA. So welcome and thank you for registering for today's webinar, Curriculum Development Overview in Writing Powerful Learning Outcomes for Health Economics Courses. So today's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes and will be recorded and uploaded on our website afterward. Before we begin the webinar, I just wanted to run through some housekeeping items. So if you experience any technical issues during today's webinar, please write them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be happy to assist you at any time. Everyone on the line has been muted except for the speakers to eliminate background noise. So if English isn't your first language, translation into a range of different languages is available using the Wordly app. So you can access this by reading the instructions in the chat, which I'll just send shortly. So at the end of the presentation, we will be holding all the questions until the end of the presentation, when we will open for a facilitated Q&A portion of the session. So I will now pass it over to Di and add those instructions for Wordly in the chat.
And I'm muted. I'm now unmuted. Thanks very much, Hayley, and hello to everyone, and welcome to the first of our workshops, and there will be a series of 6 over the course of this year. We'd like to invite you to have a look in the chat box. We're going to be posting a question there shortly. And we'd really appreciate your input on the question we pose there. So just to introduce myself, I'm Di McIntyre. I worked for about 30 years at the Health Economics Unit at the University of Cape Town, and I helped develop a Master's in Health Economics program. These series of workshops have been organized by the Teaching Health Economics SEG, and it was really in response to requests that we were receiving, and also members of the board were receiving, to assist in support the development of new programs, new health economics programs. But we recognize also that this series will hopefully help strengthen skills for people already running well-established programs. The series of workshops is also strongly linked to the board's priority of strengthening capacity in both teaching and research in health economics globally. Some people approached the board and said, please, can you actually produce a standard curriculum that would be accredited, and that's what should be taught around the world. And the board felt that that was really inappropriate, and that rather what we should be doing is to support the local development of programs that are relevant to the context, the local context. So that's what we're hoping to do through this series of workshops. Femi, Patricia and I, who are running the first workshop, are coordinating this section of this special interest group, and we felt a little bit cautious about us doing the first workshop and drawing in others to help with the next workshops. We thought about possibly getting someone who's a very experienced educationalist, but eventually we decided that actually it's better to get health economists, people who have content knowledge, to share their experience and for us to support each other in really trying to develop courses and strengthen our own skills. Just the last introductory comment, just to recognize that each country and institution is different, and we use different terminology, and so we just need to clarify our terminology sometimes as to what we're talking about, and not get too hung up about whether it's a graduate or a postgraduate or a topic or a chapter or whatever. but also that the layout requirements for, say, a curriculum or a course outline is very different, depending on your institution. So those are just some background comments. We're going to have three presentations, very brief presentations today, and then a practical exercise to try to strengthen a key skill, which is how to develop a powerful learning outcome. I'll start by providing a brief overview of course development issues. And what I'm going to do is just flip through three examples of course outlines. And please don't try to, we will post the presentations after the workshop, so you don't feel you have to read through everything. What I'm trying to do through showing you these three quick examples is to demonstrate how different institutions have different ways of laying things out. But even the second thing is that even though they do have different ways of laying things out, there are always some common themes and some common content. The first one being there's always something about learning outcomes or the aim of the module in this case. There's some information about what will be covered, the content, and sometimes about how it will be structured, what order it will go in. And generally something about the readings that people will need to do in the course. Again, quite often there's something about the learning methods, the teaching methods, and very importantly, there's always something about the assessment, how learners will be assessed. So I'm going to switch on to the next one, which you'll see is slightly different. It has purpose. It also has some objectives, quite detailed list of topics and the structure within which they'll be covered. And for each of these session topics, I've just pulled out two. Very detailed information about the objectives for that session, contents, and quite a lot more detail on readings, as well as something on assessments. The third example is laid out in a different way, but again has some of the common features. But here, a lot more emphasis on teaching activities and what form they will take, etc., as well as quite a bit more information on assessment techniques. This is the main slide that I wanted to show you, and it's an adaptation of a diagram that was used by Andrew Green in a training of trainers workshop that he ran. And it just outlines the different elements. And you'll see that we're going to cover the different elements in the different workshops. What I wanted to focus on a little bit is that it is really important before starting to actually develop details around a particular course or a whole program, is to be very clear about who's the target group for that course, because what you want learners to be able to do after the course, which are your learning outcomes, is very closely tied to it, and it will be very different depending on what the target group is. So if it's to undergraduates, you're going to have very different learning outcomes and everything else compared to if it's at a postgraduate level or graduate level. It will be very different if your target group has different disciplinary backgrounds. So if it's economists or people with a health background, and also if they, what stage of their career they're at, it might be people who are working, but again, you would have a different focus if it was managers in a health system, as opposed to somebody who's a researcher, a health economics researcher. The other thing that's important to point out is that the reason why we're focusing on learning outcomes in this first workshop is that everything else flows from those learning outcomes. So it's really important to get those right. So your curriculum content and structure, the topics that you're going to cover and the readings that you suggest for learners flows directly from the learning outcomes. In the third and fourth workshops, we're going to look at different active learning methods. So rather than just giving lectures, you could have brainstorming sessions or facilitated discussions or use case studies and exercises. And that's what we're going to look at in the fourth workshop, is how can you develop your own exercises and case studies. And the learning methods will be very different depending on what your outcomes are. So if your learning outcomes are for people to be able to use a particular skill, to use a specific kind of methodology to analyze something, then the way you're going to, the method that you're going to use is more likely to be an exercise so that they can develop those skills rather than a didactic lecture. And then finally, we will have a workshop on different ways of assessing learners, as opposed to just the standard exam that one has previously. And the last thing that I'm just going to briefly mention is something that we don't always do, but that we should do, is when we finish the course, we have course evaluations, we get feedback from learners, but do we actually invest the time in looking at should we be refining what we've got in our course, in our module, and that we should be updating and continually refining and updating our courses. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to pass on to Patricia Akuyongo, and she's going to briefly share the process that they had to go through to develop a new master's program in Ghana. It won't be the same in every country, but it will give you a sense of what is involved. If you are thinking about developing a new course, what is involved. And then after that, Femi Yayadi will provide in-depth information on learning outcomes, and she'll lead us in an exercise on learning outcomes. Over to you, Patricia.
Okay, thank you very much, Dai. Yeah, so I'm from the School of Public Health, University of Ghana. We recently started our Masters of Health Economics program, and wanted to share our experience, given the fact that Dai has already spoken about the workshops that we'll be having. Once the workshops are over, there might be an interest for people who want to actually develop a master's program or teach health economics. So I want to walk you through some of the key elements that you need to take into consideration in the length of time, as well as the content and so on. So we started our master's. We actually started this idea in 2011. We abandoned it along the way and we started it all over again. But usually it starts from the department, where the idea to mount a master's program is discussed with faculty. And then once the interest is agreed upon, we have what we call a stakeholder meeting to reflect on the curriculum. We begin writing the curriculum, and it includes the learning outcomes, the objectives, the readings, and so on that Dai has spoken about. And then once we have that together, we bring in stakeholders who are experts. Sometimes it's a mental institution from a university that is already running the same program. And then once that is done, we then present it to the school management board. That is a level before the college quality control. Once the school board agrees that this is something that the school wants to mount and that the contents are okay, then it's moved to the quality control unit of the college. And so that is also reviewed at that level, and then it's brought to the board of graduate school. And then from the board of graduate school, that is where they will look at whether this program meets the standards of the university and any master's program that is being carried out at the university. And then once the board, the graduate board reviews it, sends it back to the college board as well. And then the college board would then submit it to what we call the university academic board. That is where once it is approved, then it means that the next thing is to do to actually take it to the National Accreditation Board. But sometimes it's at this point that you have a lot of challenges, especially we had a challenge with the School of Economics that challenged us that the School of Public Health cannot run a Masters of Health Economics program, and that it should rather be hosted at the School of Economics. And this took us a while. So that is where the bone of contention would actually come, and we need to take note of it and then look at your rivals in other schools and other departments before you get to that level. And then so once that is approved, then it goes to the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, who is in charge of academic programs. It is reviewed at that level, and then it goes back to the Provost of the college, and the Provost of the college now would assist the department in the school to submit it to the National Accreditation Board and the National Council of Tertiary Education. There are other key things that you need to take into account. One of them is actually, as part of the requirements of submitting the curriculum, you need to look at what is the career path for these students that you are going to train, and then what are the job opportunities, where will they work? And this is also important because once you start producing the students, every year you need to actually get to the alumni and find out where they are, how useful the training has been, and what additions or suggestions or things that they would like to see a change in the program. And so then it also requires that you have a projection for the demand for the program, because without that, they feel that within 5 years, if you can't show a progression of the number of students who will be coming in to do the course, it might not be worth the university to run it, because the university also requires that, University of Ghana requires that a program should at least 7 to 10 people. So if you can't recruit as many as that, then it is not worth running the program. They are also concerned about gender representation. There should be a balance between males and females. And also we look at the workload, whether the faculty we have at the department will be able to teach in addition to existing workloads and so on. And then the infrastructure to run the program is also one of the things that the National Accreditation Board and National Council of the Tertiary Education will want to look at, whether you have full-time faculty. For us, they are looking at between 70% full-time and 30%, and sometimes 80%. If you have a full-time faculty, it's preferable, but once you don't have, sometimes you may need to get people who can do it part-time. And then the other thing is to ensure that there's a classroom for the course or the program. Sometimes the first semester at the University of Ghana is not so heavy, but in the second semester where the students have to take electives, we have to make sure that you have enough classrooms where these different electives can be taught. And then the practical component is to make sure that they can have a practical experience with industry, either with the Ministry of Health or any other organization that has expertise in the program that you run. And then we need to purchase books. And then once the National Accreditation Board comes, they want to see the list of books that are available for the students, whether they are online textbooks or textbooks that have been purchased. They want to see that. And then also disability-friendly facilities, both in the classroom and the library, are all some of the things that you need to have before the program can be accredited. And now I've talked about financial viability of the program when I talked about the progression, the number of students that you can recruit each year. So usually they want to see the recurrent budget, which has to do more with the tuition fees and how that is projected over the next years, and then how much money the program will make in terms of paying administrative staff and paying for cost of examination. Cost of examination actually takes quite some amount of money because you need external examiners and you also need internal examiners, and sometimes you have to fly them in to come and mark and so on. So that is also a big chunk of the budget that we need to think of. And then we have the capital expenditure that has to do with furniture, has to do with classroom space and so on. And then you need to also indicate the source of funding to meet that. So our journey took us like 3 to 5 years. Sometimes it's more, especially when there's a contention between who should host the program. But it took us 5 years from the department level to the stakeholder meetings, we had about 3 to 6 months. And then the school management meeting took about 3 months because they also review and give you comments. And then the college quality assurance committee takes about 3 to 6 months. Graduate school takes 3 months. If you miss their quarterly meetings, then you may need more months than we have assumed here. And then the university academic board also meets quarterly. And then the national accreditation actually takes 6 to 9 months. So basically, this is our journey in terms of mounting our Masters of Health Economics program. Thank you.
Great. While we're waiting for Femi to remind colleagues, please to look in the chat box. There's information if English is not your first language, on where you can find translation into other languages. And also we have posed a question that we would really appreciate your feedback on. So over to Femi. Femi, you're on mute. Femi, you still on mute? Still on mute? You're still on mute? You know, okay.
You need to call her.
I don't know what's happened. Femi, do you want me to show your presentation?
Maybe.
You want me to load it?
Dai, can you unmute Femi?
I'm not able to because she's a co-host. I'm gonna actually
Okay.
she's a co-host, so I can't.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, but you must
Unmute yourself.
I know my
yeah, no, there was
my main computer just froze on me. I can't do anything with this with the mouse.
okay.
I couldn't even exit.
Femi, you must leave the
I'm not
Zoom
able
room.
to leave. Can somebody make me, take me out of there so I can use my other computer?
Haley, I'm not sure if you're able to. I'm not able to as a
The host
as a
can
co-host.
take me out.
Remove. Yep.
Thank
Okay,
you.
let's hope you removed the right one.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Apologies, I don't know why my computer froze, but I have my laptop here. So I'm going to try to show my presentation from my laptop, but I need to pull it up. So excuse me for that. Something just happened to my main computer.
Femi, I can show it. I've got it going.
Oh, please.
Going.
All right, so you're gonna share the screen for me?
Yes, I have.
Okay, good morning and thank you all for being here. Technical difficulties, sometimes we can't get away from it. I'm going to talk today about establishing powerful learning outcomes. So research on cognition has suggested that students learn more when they know what is expected, and powerful learning outcomes help students to organize and direct their studies. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, like slide 2. Like Dee said, we're not experts in educational pedagogy. We're just enthusiastic about teaching and willing to share our ideas on how to teach well. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today are ideas that I myself learned through a course I took with the Association of Colleges and University Educators on a course on designing student-centered courses. Next slide, please. So let me start by providing a bit of context for the learning objective or the goal I'm using as an example today. It's from a chapter in my health economics course. I teach health economics both as a 16-week undergraduate session as well as an 8-week graduate session. My students are non-econ majors who are usually working on their bachelor's of science in healthcare administration or master's of healthcare administration. And the objective I'm going to be talking about today is one of about 4 to 5 objectives from a topic, or what you might call a chapter, of the market for health insurance, which I cover in about 1 week for my graduate students, or over 2 to 3 weeks for my undergraduate students. And it's usually towards the end of the semester. So before I dive in, I also want to provide a distinction that I generally view learning objectives as daunting, and it describes what should happen in the classroom or material to be covered. And I want to suggest what we're calling powerful student learning outcomes, on the other hand, as what describes what the student can demonstrate that they know and are able to do by the end of the course or the module or the program. So distinguishing between sometimes what we call objectives versus outcomes. In fact, when I first started teaching, I basically would just copy the learning objective straight from the textbook I was using into my course syllabus without giving it any thought. But over the years of teaching and taking courses on teaching pedagogy, I've learned to give my learning outcomes some more thought, just as Dai has laid out. So next slide, please. So today we want to discuss how to write powerful learning outcomes in 4 simple steps. The first step I want to talk about is that student learning outcomes should be student-centered, which basically means it describes the work that the student will be expected to do. And many of us are doing that in our course syllabus already. The next thing is to check that our learning outcomes, or what we've been calling our learning objectives, if they are observable and actionable. So this is to ensure that the students, what we're telling them they need to be doing, the learning outcome, that they can demonstrate mastery. We will see that in order to do that, to be able to write it such that the student can demonstrate mastery, we need to use action verbs and ensure that the work is measurable. So it's linking back to being able to assess them. A list of some of the action verbs will be provided in the next slide. Then the students' learning outcomes needs to be specific, because and not vague, because students need to know where to focus their efforts and their actions. And what do I need to learn? Students are always saying, what do I need to get an A? Well, if your learning outcomes are specific, they can know what to focus on. And finally, let's also ensure that our student learning outcomes are developmental, meaning that the students should be building their learning from foundational skills to higher order thinking. So some objectives or outcomes will be testing the foundational skills, while others will be more higher order thinking. Next slide. So this next slide shows the list of action verbs for writing powerful learning outcomes across. You will notice those action verbs on the left in red are the Bloom's taxonomy, from the foundational skills of remember all the way to higher order thinking skills of analyze, evaluate, and create. And this list are just what you can look at when you're looking at your learning outcomes to see if it describes it. This action verbs describes it better. And this is not an exhaustive list by no means. Let's go on to the next slide. And here I want to talk about one of the learning objectives for the topic for market for health insurance from my class. And initially my learning objective was to identify the information problems that leads to market failure in health insurance market. So I consider this a learning objective rather than a learning outcome. And what I want to walk us through today is, how do I turn this into a powerful learning action? So the first step is make it student-centered. And a simple revision from that learning objective at the top of the page is basically just saying student will be able to, or student will. So you can say student, so what I'm changing is in the red. Student will be able to identify what students will do rather than the material you will cover. Putting an emphasis on the students rather than the instructor. Many of us, like I said, already do this at the beginning of our learning objectives, and then we list them. The next action, or the next step, when you're re-looking at your learning objective, is to use the action verbs. So you pick from the list provided and make sure that your verb is observable and actionable. So when I looked at my learning objective, I looked at the action verb there, identify. I looked at the list that I provided with all those different words. I can't seem to change that. I think identify serves as a good action verb for what I want my students to be able to do for this particular task. So that's why I'm showing that identify is my learning verb there. And that leads to, I'm still keeping that, market failure in health insurance markets. Then the third step, ensure that the outcome is specific enough for students to describe what they are expected to do. So in that step, I decided that just saying market failure may not be specific enough. And so I'm saying, I decided that the specific market failure that I want my students to focus on for the health insurance market are things like moral hazard, adverse selection, supplier-induced demand. So I went ahead and just put that there to say they will be able to identify information problems such as market failure, adverse selection. So that's what you see in the red. I want students who have done a good job of learning this outcome to definitely be able to remember, say, 3 to 6 months after the end of the class, what are some specific market failure in the health insurance market. And then the final step, which is step 4, determine if the outcome should be adjusted to ensure students are using higher order thinking skills. this step is the developmental stage, and we all know that learning is developmental. So the powerful learning outcome here will cultivate both foundational and higher order thinking skills, and also depending on your audience. So if you're teaching to undergraduates, are you teaching to graduate students? Are you teaching to people who are working and coming for, some certificate course? And so the foundational skills such as remembering, the action verb is identify here. So it's a foundational skill, all the way up to maybe analyze and thinking creatively. So I changed my objective here a little bit, my learning outcome, to students will be able to identify and discuss examples of information problems, like that. So let's go on. The next slide shows you the difference between what I'm calling my initial learning objective to what I've turned into. And I would suggest that my initial learning objective is broader, which I started with, and turned into a powerful learning outcome that I ended with. I'm sure that this is not perfect, my powerful learning outcome. It probably can still be worked on, but it's a step in the right order to help the student focus to know exactly one of the outcomes that they need to master or do or know in order to be successful in this chapter talking about the market for health insurance. So those are the 4 steps. Let's go to the next slide. What I want us to do now is to go out into breakout rooms, and we have provided in the chat group, we've provided a particular set of learning outcomes. I want to encourage you to start with the first one. You don't have to walk through it, and if you are able to, in the time allotted, create a powerful learning outcome, then you can go on to the next one. I wouldn't suggest
Yeah. Perfect. So
if
yeah,
you could explain about sticky notes.
Yeah. So basically what you're going to do is on the left-hand side under this little select arrow, is you'll just add a sticky note. So I'll just do A, B, C, D, and then you can save it, it'll be added, and then you can click the select arrow again to drag and move it around. That's pretty much what it is. There's limited space in some of the stickies, so I try to keep them short or just add another sticky if needed. But yes, let me know if you have any additional questions, but it's just pretty much grabbing these little sticky notes beside. You can change the color if you'd like as well.
So if we could just ask everyone to just put up there, just write on a sticky note, the powerful learning outcome that you came up with. And if it was for objective 1, then pop it under there. If it was for objective 2, pop it under there. And if it was for another objective, just put the number of the objective and pop it on the board as well. Haley, could you keep your screen up? I'm unsure.
Yep.
I mean, are you starting to see learning objectives come up on the screen? I'm not seeing anyone writing a sticky.
Let's see. Oh, there we go.
Ah,
so they're probably
wonderful.
When you write your sticky, if you could move it to go underneath one of the objectives, that'd be great. Just because they'll all pile on top of each other otherwise. But yeah, it's all great.
So do I take over from here?
Yes, let's get some more of them put up, and then absolutely, Femi, over to you. I think you can start on objective 1. And there was quite a nice revision of Objective 5 in one of the groups, which I'm hoping they're going to share. But go for it. Start on Objective 1.
Okay, so I mean, I would like somebody from one of the groups to kind of walk us through your thinking from those 4 steps for from your learning objective to your powerful learning outcome. So showing us how you moved it from the very basic analyze determinants of demand, supply, and cost of production to what is now your powerful learning outcome. And I just want you to remind you all that it's not perfect. It's always just a moving process of getting it done. So anybody wants to share, you can unmute yourself and walk us through what you have on the Jamboard.
So Femi, I'll have a go from our group, whichever group it was. So ours is the one that starts with the number 1 in brackets. Students can distinguish. So we used your lovely table to change the word analyze, because we didn't think the word analyze makes a lot of sense sometimes to students. So we changed it to distinguish, which is one of the words in the table at the same level. Key determinants of demand and supply, and we just thought that production costs could just come under supply to make it a bit simpler. And then in terms of focus, we thought we would basically tell students that the most obvious determinant is price, and then start the list with something that most students would think of as the next most obvious determinant, and then just leave it as a sort of and ... to try to sort of guide students to the sorts of things they should be thinking of under demand and supply. So those were our levels of thinking. We changed the word. We did think that because this was master's level, we probably were looking at analyze, that's the right level. So we've tried to pick a verb, an action word from the list from that level. But I actually, looking at other people's examples, I think breaking it into the stages of list and then explain, I think is a really neat way of getting to that level as well.
Thank you, Lisa. That's pretty good, actually. Anybody else? The group that did the list and explained, do you want to explain that? Walk us through.
Hi, Femi, it's Vanessa here. Good afternoon, colleagues. So yeah, we had the wonderful advantage to have Femi in our group, but thanks, Femi. So what we did was we thought, look, yes, this is a master's class, but it's an introduction to health economics, and it might be, their first lecture, or their first block. So we'd like to unpack it and make it as student-centered and specific. So the word analyze, we thought, for the first day of this course might just be a bit overwhelming, and we looked for another action verb from the list, and we thought, initially we'd want the students to understand what these factors are rather than using the word determinants. So for understand, we from that block we found the word explain. We considered the word explain, and we considered others as well, but I think explain came up quite strongly. And yeah, and perhaps, if they include examples, then that gives them that edge and the opportunity to then exhibit their mastery, like Femi would like her students to do. That's it. But if there's any other comments,
Tessa, did you want to add to that? Thank you, Vanessa.
Thanks, Femi. Yeah, over to Tessa if I missed anything.
Vanessa did a great job.
Yeah,
I think one thing that Tessa also mentioned was when we were talking about determinants, we kind of changed that to, well, students will be able to list and explain, but we said the factors that predict. I thought that was really nice that we said the factors that predict demand. But I like how Lisa's group when unlisted, price, income, and stuff like that. Does this make sense? And one thing we can also see is we can combine 1 or 2 of this sticky notes to come up with a really powerful learning outcome. Let's look at learning outcome 2. Any group that worked with that wants to walk us through what they did?
Doesn't look like there are any ones pasted under learning outcome 2.
Oh, one is pasted there. Okay. List and
the,
explain the
oh wait,
factors.
no, that's objective 1. Oh,
Yes.
there is one, because it said the original said apply. So there is one group that has
That went to learning outcome 2.
Yeah. So instead of apply the concepts, it says explain using
Explain.
examples. So maybe that group could speak to that a bit.
Anybody?
You're on
Going?
mute.
You can unmute yourself, yes.
Then I would just go to learning.
Why don't we go to
outcome
learning
5.
outcome 5, the group that did that, the 5th learning objective to learning. And I like how you wrote both out so we can see what you edited. Laptop is so small. Somebody want to walk us through that? You can unmute yourself.
So I'm not being very useful by working it through. Sorry for jumping in. But we were just a group of 2, and I think it didn't translate well into French in terms of the description going from, a passive to an active, and basically making it a verb and changing the tense like that. So we never managed to get through the exercise, mostly just talked through the concept of how to apply it. Just to kind of,
That's great.
Yeah, but that was
we
great
are
because
here and we are still talking about it.
You changed, you said students will be able to explain the steps. So you broke
No,
it down.
explain. This is for objective 2. Explain using examples. Is that correct, Gavin? I think.
No, I was saying that I didn't actually put any up because my group mates and I were talking through the concepts.
Okay.
More than going through the actual examples, just in terms of how to make a task actionable to a person.
Mm.
And I think because it was the French language,
Right.
yeah. And I'm not sure how well that concept translates into French easily.
Hmm.
The active and passive.
Yes.
That's very helpful. Yeah.
It's
very helpful.
And I know from myself learning Dutch, it's something to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is not difficult. It's not easy. It's actually what I've learned since I've been doing this in my classes, that it really takes a while to be able to walk through looking at what you thought was a good learning objective and really using those 4 steps to break it down and think of, remember that we're also thinking of assessment, which is one of the other workshops we're going to do, is how am I going to assess that, and how are the students going to demonstrate mastery of what I want to assess. So I guess to sort of wrap it up I want to encourage everybody to go back to your course levels. You don't have to perfect it all in one afternoon. You can even do it over the course of a semester. And as you're teaching the classes, to go back to your learning outcome and say, is this a powerful learning objective? And use the things you're thinking through as you're assessing your students or talking to them to go back and try to tweak your learning objectives to a powerful learning outcome. And I think the more we do it, the more we'll get better at it. We can even tweak it every semester if we want. So I guess that's what I wanted to say about that. Over to you, Dai.
Great, thank you. Tessa, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point that I've sort of had to learn about learning outcomes in part through getting my planned learning outcomes rejected by academic board, and then being told that, you know, things weren't framed in the right way. And one of the things that I had put in quite a lot in my original learning outcomes was the term understand, because I'm like, that's what I want the students to do. I want them to understand. And I guess it's taken me a while to realize that my learning outcomes have to be something that, like you've just said, Femi, links into the assessment. But it's kind of, how do I know they've understood? And if I can frame it as something where I can take away and go, yes, I now know you've definitely understood, then that's going to be more helpful for not only me for planning assessment, but the students as well. So thank you very much for the session this evening. It was really, really useful. So thank you.
Yeah, and that diagram that I put up, you know, it's kind of everything comes down from the learning objectives. And in a way, yes, you know, understanding your target group and getting clear your learning objectives. But actually, there's a bit of iteration. So you don't get the perfect learning objectives. But as you start to work out, okay, I need to cover this. And because I want to, I need to do this in the form of an exercise rather than as a didactic lecture, or in order to get people to really understand, maybe it's better to have a facilitated discussion. And then you get to the assessment and you think, now how on earth am I going to assess understanding? So it is a bit of an iterative process. And I think they feed back into refining the learning outcomes. But we are at 1 hour, 15 minutes, which we were trying to sort of stick to. But I just wanted to thank everyone for joining the workshop. And to thank Femi and Patricia for presenting and helping facilitate this workshop. We will have, as I say, 5 more workshops, and we might even be drawing on some of you because we are certainly, Pat, Femi and I are certainly not doing them all. But what we would really appreciate, very few people wrote in the chat box, but you've certainly got my address and you've got the I Hear address. We would love to know if the interest in this workshop was more from, I want to enhance my skills, or if there are people who are actually wanting to develop new programs. We're really keen to get a sense of the demand for support in developing new curricula. So if you could send us an email, that would be absolutely great. But if there's nothing else, thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Thank you, Hayley, for helping us navigate breakout rooms, Jamboard, recording and translation. And we look forward to seeing you in the next workshop. Thanks, everyone.